POV, you're designing something and you want to explore more, but you don't know how else to design it. Don't worry, I got you. If there's one thing I've mastered in my career, it's how to lay out a page. Hey friends, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Tirso. I am a creative director who is not afraid of options. If you've seen my other videos, I always do multiple versions of the same layout. This was a huge aspect of my training when I first started out as an editorial designer. It was a rather grueling upbringing, but it did allow me to no longer be afraid of a blank page and be able to reimagine how else the elements can work together. When it comes to layout design, the ideas are pretty endless. It's not infinite, but there is a lot you can do, which is why I'm doing a lot of versions. If you're stuck with how else you can lay out a page, here are some techniques on how to achieve multiple options. Here's our text. I will be designing a single page. This looks like a lot, but it will fit, I promise. The first approach, which is probably the most common in designing a layout, is changing the focal point. A great place to start is using the rule of thirds. There's a section that talks about wine, so here is a wine glass, and I'm just using that top left area. And then changing the focal point, we can move it to the top right, the bottom left, and the bottom right. The focal point of the wine glass is that dark area, and in these options, the placement is specifically in the intersections of the grid. Let's start with the image in the top left for now. Since the wine glass faces down, I'll put the styled text below. This entire page is essentially a bunch of sidebars, so I want to section them off. Here I'm just using a rule. When it comes to using a rule, my rule of thumb is to either go big or go home, so either have them thin or thick. There's also a fine line between something that's thick and then too thick. So now we can drop in the rest of our content into that column. I don't want to go over the type in full, but in the styling, I'm using a main body styling for the wine and Brazilian steakhouse sections. There's a lot going on, so we wanted some sort of baseline for the page. For the prime aged meat, I paired a condensed face with the sans serif to give it some contrast from the rest of the text. Just looking at this again, I think I want the statistic in the middle so it breaks up the two larger sections. There we go. All right, we have a layout. The next focal point is to have the wine glass in the top right, but we don't have to do too much, you just flip the layout. I quite like the overlap of the spill and the rule. If we think it's too much spill, then we can simply flip it like this. The next focal point is the bottom left. This time I'll have the text on top. You can see that the original block doesn't fit so well. Whenever you move elements around, always expect that something can or has to change. This isn't a big deal. I can style it like this, and now it fits. All we have to do here is drop in the exact column we had in the first layout, and here's another option. For the bottom right, let's first flip the layout and see what happens. Clearly, we don't have enough image. The simplest solution is to cut off the image. This option actually gives the rule more purpose, which is nice. As we did in the top right, we can also flip the glass and then adjust our text. Here are all those options. There's another focal point we didn't do, which is the center. If we keep the wine glass the same size, it's not going to work because we don't have enough image. However, if we scale the wine glass larger, we can keep the focal point in the middle. Now all of our content will be laid around the image. Since the rest of the content is text, you should be looking at the rest of the space in blocks. Here I'm still using the column grid, but these are the general allocation of areas to use. First, let's drop in our wine copy in the top right. Next, our steakhouse copy can only fit in the left column, so I'm going to keep it there. I want to break up the grid a bit by having a horizontal section. I fit the prime aged meat section in this area. I definitely want to separate this from the content above, so I'll use a horizontal rule here. This is up to personal preference, but I feel like it needs to be thicker. This is 8 points. Dual purpose for the rule here, it separates from the content above, but it also groups the 3 columns underneath it together. Last, we have our stat, which we need contrast from all these columns of text, so I'm going to put it in a colored box. Tiny detail. All the copy feels like it's on top of the image, which isn't wrong because that's exactly what we did, but text and image should feel like they're part of the same space. So I'm going to bring the corner of the wine glass above the colored box. The wine glass was on a white background, which gave the page some additional white space. I'm now using a lifestyle image, and I've also swapped the section for the Brazilian steakhouse. Starting with the top left again, I'll drop the text below it. This is what happens when you change things. The text no longer takes up the full column, so the space we have to work with has already changed. I do want to break up the grid here again. What we can do is use this entire bottom area as a horizontal section. This was the original block of text. I'm using a 7-column grid here, so I can use 2 columns for the head and subhead, which leaves 5 columns for the block of copy. This line length is way too long. I'll repeat this in every video since I don't know who has or hasn't seen my other videos, but the standard line length for readability is 48 to 75 characters. This is at 142, which is beyond. I can simply break this up into 2 columns and now it all fits. I've separated sections in the past with a rule, but I don't think it's necessary here since the contrast in the use of the grid separates it from the content above it. Let's place our wine copy. I did change the styling for the headline here. Every designer has a reasoning for things, but it does bother me if a word is in a color and it's not in that color. The black bar here helped me achieve the red, white, and red. Last, we have the statistic. There's this pocket of space underneath. I don't want to fill it, but instead redistribute the space so it feels full. I'll align the stat to the bottom of the text block on the left. Next, I'll add a rule. The purpose of the rule is to separate the content, yes, but it also provides us with this corner. If I now adjust the text, we've created a nice channel of white space, giving the text room to breathe. This is our main layout, and then we can do the other focal points like this. There are some adjustments we can make here. For this one, I don't love that we have a block of color on top of a block of color, so I'll adjust it like this. And last, for all of these, there could be an opinion that all of the text is together. We can break that up by swapping the position of the photo, which changes the focal point again. Setting your focal points from the beginning is just a starting off point. After review, you still have to adjust the layouts accordingly. The wine glass and steakhouse images were anchored in the 4 corners of the page, but the layout can feel copy heavy. In InDesign, we balance heaviness with white space. We can create more white space in our layout by making the hero image smaller. Still working with the rule of thirds, instead of using the corners for focal points, we can use the different modules, which makes it smaller. Here are all 9 of them. I can actually do these in tandem this time. We'll start with the 2 images on the top left and right. I'm going to drop the text next to it instead of below. In order to align it with the text, the image became even smaller. Let's drop in our wine section. On the left layout, it perfectly aligns to the photo, so to avoid any confusion, I'm going to move it over to the opposite side. This also breaks up the grid like the layout on the right. In the last example, we use a photo to break up the text blocks. We can do the same here by using the statistics, so I'll put the come of age section at the bottom, and then the stat can go above. For these directions, we can just flip the layouts for the options with the image on the bottom left and right. So now let's do the options with the photo in the vertical center. The copy can really only fit above and below. Now all we have to do is fit the rest of the copy in the other 2 columns. Let's start with the wine section. In order to fit the space, I broke up the headline into 3 lines. With the same method we used earlier, I added a rule to create the channel around the body copy, which helped fit the text to the bottom. On this left column can go the rest of the content. We need to adjust the space. I don't want to use another rule because we already have it on the right column. This time I'm going to use a light background to create a column block, which creates contrast from the other sections. Now we can drop in our text. The background helps create some white space and pushes our text down to fill it a little. We do have quite a bit of space for the statistic. Before I move on, can you think of a way for it to fit better in the space? You can pause the video, but I'll give 10 seconds here. The number can only be so big horizontally, so we can rotate it and run it vertically instead. We don't want the reader to actually rotate the page. To prevent this, you run the copy left aligned. I'll also change the styling. Since I got bigger, I went thinner. I want to call out a Gestalt principle here. We're using common region where you group information related to each other through a common region, in this case, the gray background. The top is talking about steak and the statistic is also talking about steak. You could have the wine section above, but it is more focused on wine, so I think the steak section is the better option. You can disagree, you're not wrong, but that's just my reasoning. For these layouts, the columns can actually fit on any part of the layout. While we're here, these are all of the variations. Yes, they're all different. You can pause to check. Now we have two which are anchored in the horizontal center. The text will live next to it. I'm not going to adjust the height just yet because I want to see how much space I need for the other sections. The wine section fits above like this, and then I'll split the rest on the bottom. Everything is running into each other, so I'll separate with rules. For this middle section, I'm going to align it to the bottom of the photo because I like the white space above it. And then the two other versions for this is flipping the top and the bottom sections. Absolutely not necessary, but something to consider. You could actually right align the middle section on these layouts so that the edge is clean to the photo. In the last example, we made the hero image smaller. In this example, I'm going to make the statistic bigger. You can do this many ways. The two I'm going to go with are a full horizontal and a full vertical. For the full horizontal, I'll start with it top and bottom. The steakhouse section will go on the opposite side. What I'm doing is basically creating a frame for the page, so now all we have to do is work with the content in the middle. The wine section isn't fitting so nicely. I would normally say we like white space, but this feels off, or a mistake, if you will. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. To fix this, I adjusted the height of the columns and fit some wine glasses in the extra space. The overlap gives some dimension to the page. That glass on the side also helps break the grid. Again, the image is incorporated into the space. I'm not going to flip these layouts because we're going to run into the same issue we had earlier where the width of the steak section matches the width of the photo, so these are done. For the option with the stat in the middle, you can simply use it to separate the other two horizontal sections, and here are those two options. Don't go crazy doing all the versions. I just wanted to show that if something isn't working, you can shift one thing, which will shift the rest, and then other options will quickly develop if you need. We still have the vertical version, and here are 6 options for that. I think it's getting a little repetitive going over everything. If you made it this far in the video, we should be familiar with what all the elements are. In the next sections, I'll just cover the main changes. In the first two examples, the image was vertical, so let's do one where it's horizontal. This is a horizontal image that I found. I know this isn't steak, but I couldn't find very many free stock photos of steak, so this is just neat enough. It's a hero image for the entire page, so all of our content will fit below. Here are 3 ways to lay that out. I used exactly the same methods we went through using columns, breaking the grid, etc. I will admit it does feel quite text heavy because we've lost a lot of white space, but again, it's an option to explore. While we're here, you can get even more options by simply changing the hero image, and you don't even need to change the layout. If you followed my channel, you knew this was coming. We must always be able to communicate by type and type alone. I did 2 directions of type lockups. I just wanted them to feel very different from each other. These are 3 layouts that I explored for the first direction, similar approaches to what we covered in all of the examples. I did use a 5-column grid for these. I probably could have done a section on changing the grid, but I think that's an entirely different video. And then here are 3 other layouts for the other direction. The page is text heavy as it is. These options basically just embrace that. If our black and white options work, they will also work in color. Here are 3. You can do as many versions of color as you want. What you're really looking to do is have a set of different palettes so you can compare between them and make a decision. This isn't the best layout to work with because I'm pretty much bound to red or some version of red. In the first option, I wanted to see what the red would look like with a cooler tone. In the second option, I paired the red with a gold, and the last one with more of a monochrome palette. Here are the 3 options with the other type styles. This direction really isn't my typical design style, but I'm happy with how they turned out. This first one is using red as a highlight. In the second option, the number is so big, but the gold helps it recede. The third option here is also monochrome, but this time I'm using the color in color blocks. Regarding color, it doesn't necessarily need to be distributed throughout your layout. You can also use it more strategically by calling something out. In these options, I'm simply using it as a color block for an entire section. Speaking of color blocks, I sometimes use a strip of color to draw attention. In the first one, the contrast for the statistic is called out even more because it's the only block of text in white. The second one uses the color to section off a part of the layout. In the last layout, the strip allows the number to break past the edge, creating some overlap. When you've done enough options, go back and review. I went back to these layouts and I really loved how the overlap of the glass crossed over. I think it's a nice moment, but it's a little too subtle. I wanted to push how this could be emphasized because the shadow of the wine glass can provide some nice directional movement for the page. This time I'm gonna use the original photo of what the team shot on set. It's like night and day compared to the stock photos I found earlier, but this is the difference of what it means to have an art director on set. For the glass, I want it larger and subtle, like this guy over here. If we apply our original rule of thirds to this, these would be our starting points. In the second option, I flip the glass just to show you that there is flexibility in using that image. Here are the two versions with the images on top. Using the statistic on the photo really helps save some real estate. Overlap is emphasized with the glass on top of the image, but also the shadow on top of the text. These are the moments in the layout that really bring it to life for me. It wasn't originally on purpose, but the edge of the glass nicely matches the border of the other circle. Here are the other versions with the image on the bottom. On the left, the wine glass nicely directs you into the page, but the one on the right, the shadow on the wine glass nicely overlaps the photo and then directs the reader towards the prime age meet section. We went through a lot. Here is every single option that we did. Some of you may be questioning, what's the point to all these versions? So let me put it into context. We as designers never design for ourselves. There is always feedback coming from someone. Here's the first layout we did. I think it looks good. I would say any improvements would be marginal from a design standpoint. But then let's say someone says the spill looks messy. Fine. So you redo the page and show them these options. Someone else comments, I want the steak to be more prominent and in color. So you come up with this. And then another comment is, the image feels too dark. Okay, so we end up here. Let's say everyone agrees they like this option, but then you in the art department find out that there will be an ad next to it on the right-hand page. I just chose Delta because I've been flying a lot lately, but now that we know the ad is there, we should rework the layout so that the photo doesn't bleed into it, which would be this version. And last, some asshole says, I want the wine section to be first. So you end up here, and now everyone is happy. How do you think I did? This video was meant to be more inspirational than tutorial. Hopefully it opens up your mind on how a layout can evolve as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Go check out more content on the channel and be prolific in your work. I'll see you next time.